So, picture your social media feed right now. Just, conjure it up in your mind.
Oh, yeah. We all know exactly what that looks like.
Right. The hot takes, the endless outrage, the manufactured drama. It's just that constant, exhausting wall of noise.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you scroll and scroll, and you can almost feel your attention span like splintering. But what if I told you that the exact psychological and cultural breakdown of our modern digital life was predicted by a 19th century philosopher?
A philosopher who, I should add, never even saw a computer, let alone a smartphone.
Exactly. It sounds like science fiction.
It really does. But, when you examine the historical trajectory of how humanity shares information, that wall of noise on your screen starts to look less like a technological glitch and, well, much more like an inevitable collision. We basically built a machine that perfectly exploits human nature.
And that collision is exactly the mission for our deep dive today. We are exploring a super fascinating convergence of ideas pieced together from our sources. We're connecting the entire history of human communication, classical elitism, and the devastating modern reality of what happens when you combine mass broadcasting with monetary incentives.
Yeah, we really need to trace that arc from the very beginning. We're going to unpack how humanity went from guarding knowledge in ancient, secluded temples to, well, handing every single person on Earth a global megaphone.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. And more importantly, we have to look at the underlying mechanisms, right?
Yeah.
Like why this massive shift might be systematically destroying our ability to achieve what the ancients called the grandeur of thought.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can even begin to understand the chaos of the modern internet, we really have to establish a historical baseline.
Right.
We have to understand how unnaturally slow and intensely filtered information used to be. I mean, for the vast majority of human history, we lived in a world completely without writing.
Which is incredibly hard for us to conceptualize today. I mean, imagine a world where memory is the only archive of civilization.
Wow, yeah. No hard drives, no books.
Nothing. In an oral culture, traditions, complex laws, religious beliefs, they were passed down entirely through speech. If a concept couldn't be remembered by the elders or the poets or the storytellers, it literally ceased to exist.
That's a huge amount of pressure.
Exactly. Knowledge could only travel as fast as human footsteps and human voices. And the sheer cognitive bandwidth required to maintain that information meant that only the most vital, resonant ideas actually survived. It was essentially a natural filter.
I mean, think about the mental energy it took to memorize an entire epic poem. You didn't have the luxury of memorizing random passing thoughts.
Right. You're not memorizing what someone had for breakfast.
Yeah, exactly. So the invention of writing wasn't just a neat new tool. It was arguably the most transformative moment in history. For the very first time, an idea could actually outlive the person who spoke it. You could externalize memory.
But here is the crucial reality check from our sources. Writing did not democratize knowledge.
Not at all.
No, for centuries, literacy was incredibly rare. Books were hand-copied, they were scarce, and they were wildly expensive. The public sphere, the realm where ideas actually shaped society, was strictly limited to a very narrow intellectual elite.
We're talking monasteries, royal courts, temples.
Exactly.
Think of historical knowledge like an exclusive VIP club. But the bouncer at the door was literally knowing how to read and having the free time to not be working in a field all day.
Yeah, you couldn't even get near the club unless you had enormous privilege.
And the ancient Greeks were actually brutally honest about the economics of that VIP club, weren't they?
Very honest. Our sources highlight a really uncomfortable truth about classical civilization. The Greeks justified the institution of slavery partly on the grounds that the physical labor of slaves was what liberated citizens to devote their time to philosophy, politics, and, artistic creation.
Right.
Intellectual life requires leisure. You simply cannot ponder the geometry of the universe if you are starving and working a plow 14 hours a day.
It's a dark reality to confront. The very foundations of Western philosophy were built on a system of extreme inequality. It literally took the physical labor of dozens just to buy one person the quiet afternoon required to think deeply.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it explains a fundamental current in classical thought. This extreme bottleneck of information didn't just create a logistical reality, it created a profound philosophical suspicion of the masses.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, early thinkers like the pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus believed that the deeper order of reality, what he called the logos, could only be understood by a tiny minority.
And the logos wasn't just logic, right?
Right. It was seen as the underlying operating system of the universe. Grasping it required immense discipline and cognitive heavy lifting. So to Heraclitus, the general public was essentially sleepwalking. Philosophy was definitively not a democratic enterprise.
So if you genuinely believe the masses are incapable of understanding reality, how do you design a society?
Well, for Plato, the answer was absolute epistemological control. The sources bring up his famous ship analogy from the Republic, which is super vivid.
Oh, I love this one.
Yeah, so imagine you are on a massive ship, right? A storm is brewing, and the passengers suddenly rise up and seize control of a wheel from a highly trained navigator.
Just a mutiny based on confidence.
Exactly. The passengers truly believe they can steer the ship because they think everyone's opinion is equal, even though they literally know nothing about the stars, the currents, or navigation.
It's such a visceral metaphor. So Plato's argument was that those who understand reality most deeply should be the ones governing it.
Precisely. Handing the wheel to a popularity contest is just a recipe for a shipwreck. And for centuries, the sheer mechanics of communication ensured that this elitist structure remained mostly intact.
Even after Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press in the 15th century, right?
Yeah, even then. It massively accelerated the spread of ideas, sure, but the ability to influence public thought remained highly filtered. You still needed publishers, you needed editors, physical distribution networks.
But those filters eventually started to thin out. As literacy slowly spread and the working classes started to gain a voice in the cultural conversation, these classical philosophers started issuing these, dark prophecies.
They really did.
They were absolutely terrified of what happens when the crowd takes over culture.
And this brings us to Friedrich Nietzsche and his concept of the last man. Nietzsche looked at the trajectory of society and saw this growing divide.
What were the two sides?
On one side, you had exceptional individuals capable of immense struggle and creating new values. On the other side, you had what he bluntly called the herd.
Ouch.
Yeah, the herd represents a conformist majority that prioritizes comfort, security, and equality above absolutely everything else.
So the last man is basically the ultimate product of that herd mentality. They seek only modest pleasures. They avoid deep intellectual struggle. They avoid ambition. They avoid risk. They just blink in contentment, wrap themselves in a warm blanket, and claim they have invented happiness.
It's an image of a civilization that has basically traded the pursuit of greatness for perpetual coziness.
Which honestly sounds a little nice sometimes, but I get why Nietzsche hated it.
Well, Nietzsche believed the voice of the herd is a massive leveling force that pulls humanity down from its peaks. Why? Because greatness requires friction. It requires you to be uncomfortable.
And he wasn't alone in this sentiment at all. Arthur Schopenhauer had a deeply cynical take on how the crowd interacts with the individual.
Oh, his quote on this is brutal.
He famously wrote, "The amount of noise that anyone can bear undisturbed stands in inverse proportion to his mental capacity."
Yeah.
I mean, I feel attacked by that quote, considering I can barely work without some audio playing in the background. But what is the actual mechanism there? Why does Schopenhauer think noise is the enemy of intellect?
Mechanically speaking, it's about cognitive continuity. A high degree of intellect requires it. If you are trying to synthesize complex, abstract ideas, your brain is holding dozens of fragile variables in place all at once.
Like balancing clicks.
Right. And any external noise, whether it's literal street noise or the metaphorical noise of social chatter, it shatters that cognitive structure.
Ah, I see.
Schopenhauer argued that ordinary minds don't mind noise because they lack that rich interior architecture to protect in the first place. They actually crave constant external stimulation to avoid being alone with their own emptiness.
Wow, tell us how you really feel, Arthur.
Right. But it echoes the ancient critic Longinus, who argued that true sublimity in art or thought is the echo of a great soul. And great soul requires absolute, unbroken solitude.
And we see this anxiety carry right into the 20th century, too. Thinkers like Ortega y Gasset warned about the mass man suffering from intellectual complacency.
Yeah, and then you have Heidegger warning about das Man, the anonymous they.
Think about the last time you saw a Twitter mob form. You don't see individual people anymore, right? You just see the avatar of the crowd. People stop acting like themselves and start conforming to this phantom average of how one is supposed to act.
That is Das Man in action, perfectly described.
I have to pause here, though, and push back a little. Because listening to this, I mean, these guys sound like massive gatekeeping snobs.
Oh, they were definitely snobs.
Right. Is this just aristocratic arrogance? Are we just reading the diaries of privileged guys who were furious that the peasants were finally learning to read and disrupting their quiet time? Or did they actually have a valid point about the solitary conditions required for genuine human brilliance?
It is entirely fair to read a level of aristocratic arrogance into their tone, but we have to separate their personal snobbery from their underlying structural observation.
Okay, how so?
Well, our sources make a vital distinction here. While human dignity and moral worth are undeniably equal, human beings have historically not been equal in intellectual discipline, focus, or depth of thought.
That makes sense.
Transformative advances, like the theory of relativity, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, the foundational texts of philosophy, they have almost exclusively originated from solitary minds. Genius has historically required inwardness, sustained reflection, and critically, the courage to resist prevailing public opinion.
Which is the exact opposite of social conformity.
Precisely. So they were terrified of a world where the prevailing opinion of the crowd drowns out the solitary genius.
But for a long time, their fears were mostly theoretical, right? Even in the age of mass media, institutional filters still existed.
Exactly. Books still had editors who rejected bad manuscripts.
Television still had producers who decided what went on air. There were gatekeepers.
Until the internet arrived, the digital revolution completely vaporized the institutional filters. It gave Nietzsche's last man a global megaphone. Suddenly, social media placed into every single hand the exact same broadcasting power that used to belong exclusively to kings, prophets, and major media conglomerates.
And this creates the ultimate modern paradox. We have perfectly distributed expressive power. Literally everyone has a voice.
Yeah, everyone.
But as a result, the quality of public discourse hasn't ascended to a new golden age of philosophy. It has completely plummeted because the architecture of the new public square is built for eruption, not elevation.
That's the key. The platforms are not designed to foster deep contemplation. Think about the user interface of your favorite app. It doesn't invite you to sit back and reflect for an hour.
No, not at all.
It is explicitly designed to capture attention in microbursts.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because it's not just that everyone has a megaphone, it's that we added a catastrophic new ingredient to the mix, which is money.
The game changer.
Our sources call this the poison of incentive. It's like giving every single person on Earth a printing press, but the machine only prints money if you use it to start a massive bar fight.
What's fascinating here is that tragic irony of it all. Those classical thinkers feared that the masses would simply drown out the wise with their sheer volume.
Just by being too loud.
Right. What they failed to predict was the creation of an algorithmic economic engine that would actively reward the roar of the herd.
Exactly. The moment speech became convertible to revenue, when clicks literally translated into ad dollars, the entire system aligned to the lowest common denominator. But why does outrage win over truth? It's a psychological mechanism, right? Cognitive ease.
Precisely. The pursuit of attention is an economic imperative now. If you want millions of views, you cannot appeal to reflection or reason.
Because truth requires work.
It does. Truth requires the cognitive heavy lifting of reading, verifying, understanding nuance, and, accepting ambiguity. That takes mental calories.
And the last man avoids intellectual struggle.
Exactly. Outrage, however, is a cheap, instant dopamine hit. It's cognitively easy. The algorithm mathematically measures this ease, and it turns out anger and in-group tribalism are the easiest emotions for a human being to process and share.
So grandeur of thought does not generate ad revenue. Reading a complex 20-page essay doesn't trigger the algorithm to serve you more ads.
But fake news does.
Right. AI-generated slop does. Conspiracy theories do, because they trigger that emotional eruption that keeps you scrolling. And the ultimate irony here is that the wise must now stoop to the level of the crowd just to be heard.
The metaphor our sources use for this is really striking. Think of a vast landscape. The mountain peaks, where great thinkers once stood to survey the horizon, they're empty now.
Wow.
Not because no one is capable of climbing them, but because shouting from the summit brings no reward. Nobody is looking up.
Because everyone is in the valley.
Exactly. The valley is where the crowd gathers, and the crowd is where the money flows. If a potential philosopher wants to participate in public life today, they have to choose between total silence or descending into the valley to join the endless noise of the spectacle.
It's an incredibly bleak picture, but I want to take this out of the realm of abstract 19th century European philosophy and drop it right into the real world.
Yeah, let's ground this.
Our sources provide a highly specific, modern case study. We get an epilogue looking at the real-world fallout of this digital phenomenon in Pakistan.
This case study is crucial because it takes everything we've discussed about algorithms, the last man, and the architecture of eruption, and demonstrates how it exacerbates existing societal frictions in profoundly dangerous ways.
Right, it's not theoretical anymore.
No, we are looking at a society that underwent a massive, compressed cultural shock starting in the early 1990s.
Right. Because before the 90s, media in Pakistan was highly restricted, deeply traditional, and controlled by local gatekeepers, whether that was the state, religious leaders, or family elders.
Very filtered.
Super filtered. Then came the launch of AsiaSat, which brought satellite television to South Asia. Suddenly, ordinary people were flooded with MTV, Western soap operas, and concepts they had never really encountered before, like Valentine's Day.
It was a massive shift.
It was a direct, jarring collision between global modern pop culture and centuries-old traditional norms.
But that initial collision via satellite TV was disruptive, sure, but it was still a one-way broadcast.
Yep.
The real explosion happened when the smartphone era arrived.
Right, when it became interactive.
Exactly. Introducing frictionless social media into a society like Pakistan, which is already dealing with severe economic hardship, deep sectarian fault lines, and political instability, well, it's like taking a room full of highly combustible gas and removing all the walls.
The platforms didn't create the gas, obviously.
No, the sectarian and cultural tensions were already there, but the algorithms provided the spark in the wind.
So what does this all mean for us? When we look at a highly volatile situation like this, are we seeing a technology problem, or we're just seeing a terrifying mirror of human nature that has been amplified by a billion?
That raises a really important question about the promise versus the reality of these platforms. I mean, the Silicon Valley promise was connection, democracy, and empowerment.
Right, bringing the world closer together.
But the reality is that the platforms monetize division. In Pakistan, according to our sources, we've seen a massive power shift. The traditional gatekeepers, the village elders, the established clerics who at least operated within a known framework, they've lost immense power to 19-year-old viral influencers.
And how do you go viral in a fractured society? You lean into the extremes.
Exactly.
Misused notions of freedom of expression have morphed into something incredibly dark. We are talking about coordinated cyber harassment, massive character assassinations, and mob-led blasphemy accusations based on entirely fabricated viral scandals.
It's terrifying. Accusing someone of a serious religious crime used to require a formal process. Now it requires a hashtag, a deceptively edited video, and an algorithm that pushes it to 100,000 angry people in an hour.
A single inflammatory post, perfectly crafted to trigger maximum outrage and reap that algorithmic reward, can literally ignite street protests. It destroys reputations overnight. It costs lives.
And this is Nietzsche's last man made flesh. It is a generation raised entirely on instant digital validation, chasing dopamine hits, believing that mere visibility, no matter how destructive, is the highest possible good.
Wow.
The technology removed all the friction from communication. But in a complex society, removing friction doesn't elevate the discourse. It simply arms the loudest, most reactive voices.
So the fragile space required for genuine individuality, for that solitary thinker to retreat, engage in deep focus, and produce actual insight, that space is actively shrinking.
It's being bulldozed by the algorithm. We basically took the greatest communication tool in human history, and we turned it into a machine that flawlessly executes the desires of the herd.
Man, it really reframes how you look at the phone in your pocket. To summarize this incredible journey, humanity actually achieved something beautiful at first.
We did.
We won a massive moral victory by democratizing communication. We gave everyone a voice, escaping that ancient, elitist VIP club where only the wealthy could speak.
Right.
But we accidentally paired that beautiful moral victory with an economic algorithm that mathematically drowns out the sublime with the endless, profitable roar of the crowd.
We built the perfect ecosystem for the last man to thrive, while making it economically impossible for the mountain climber to survive.
So I want to challenge you, the listener. Take this into your actual life. The next time you are scrolling through your feed and you feel that sudden, hot urge to engage with an outrageous post, to leave an angry comment or quote tweet a controversial take just to dunk on it, take a breath.
Yeah, just pause.
Ask yourself, are you just feeding the last man? Are you letting the algorithm exploit your cognitive ease for a cheap dopamine hit? Or are you looking for the mountaintop?
And I'll leave you with one final, somewhat unsettling thought to mull over. Our sources emphasize that throughout human history, transformative advances always came from solitary minds.
Right.
Crucially, their ideas were carefully preserved for the future in manuscripts, books, and filtered archives. But today, our modern digital algorithms act as our primary historical archive.
Which is terrifying.
Exactly, because they are designed to only preserve and reward the loudest, most inflammatory content in the valley. So, a century from now, will future historians even know that solitary deep thinkers existed in our time? Or will the historical record of our entire era simply look like one giant endless roar?